Hi there, Danny from the Joshua Tree. Thanks for joining us as we continue our series in the book of Proverbs, considering God's wisdom for real issues that we face. And we've been seeing that life is made up of these crossroads moments, these opportunities where we have the decision to pursue wisdom or folly, to head down a path that's going to enliven us or a path that's going to destroy us. There's opportunities every day to demonstrate faith in God's existence and His promises, or to rebel against that and pursue our own path. These crossroads moments fill our life. Our life is made of millions of small decisions that chart the course of who we are and where we end up. And we've been hearing from the book of Proverbs that the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. It's this idea of having a sense in each moment that we have a decision before us, that we are standing at the crossroad, that we have the opportunity to trust whether God exists, whether God is there, and indeed whether God is worthy of our worship in that moment. And so I think for those of you who are in lockdown like myself, 3 months into this, we realise that actually the decisions that we've been making each day have charted the course of where we are. I went to put a shirt on today and it was pretty tight, realising that my shorts are a bit hard to put together because decisions. Those moments of going to the pantry, of going to the fridge. These small decisions add up and they've chart a course for where I am now. And that's the situation that we find ourselves in life. And so the book of Proverbs, it gives us help for these particular decisions. It gives us orientation about how we approach them. It gives us guidance about what it means to seek God and to follow Him in these moments. And so over previous weeks, we've been thinking about anger, truth and lies, friendships, listening. As I've been reflecting on this and as I've been chatting with others about their experience in lockdown, one of the key aspects of these particular moments that we all experience in life is this idea of self-control. Now, self-control as a word is used in the book of Proverbs, but it seems more of like a framework that's there guiding many of these particular moments that we experience. Now, last week when Pierre gave us a framework for how we could engage with the book of Proverbs, he suggested a couple of options, one of which was just to sit with a proverb and to just really dwell on it. Another was to try and see how the flow of all these various proverbs together, how they might give us a shape of human life. So we're going to spend 10 minutes doing both of those approaches as we think about self-control in the book of Proverbs. So our one proverb that we're really just going to sit with for 10 minutes is Proverbs 25:28, which says, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." And now thinking about ancient Near Eastern world where a city had some kind of perimeter wall, this was a normal means of protection. It was to help give a sense of identity and ownership and to solidify some sense of peace and safety for those who resided in it. It was sort of the base level of protection against other opposing nations or armies. It was to be the base by which any protection or military force would flow from. And so to have a city whose walls were broken would be to have a people who were just waiting to be overtaken. It's a bit like us living in a house or a room. If you're in a shared house that doesn't have any locks on the doors, I don't know if you ever go to someone's house and you go into their bathroom and there's no lock on the door. It's like, oh, this is vulnerable. Someone could come in here. I remember for Helena and I, when we went overseas one time, we sort of had a really early flight one day, and it was a bit of a commute, and we just thought, I'll just sleep in the car that night. We'll watch a movie late and get to the airport early. There's no use getting accommodation for 3 or 4 hours. It was the first time I've ever slept in the car. And if you sleep in the car, it actually gets really hot, and so you need fresh air, so you need to wind the window down. But there I was in this strange city thinking, well, actually, I don't know if I can go to sleep. And that was my sort of first experience of what many people are feeling on the streets who sleep rough in our city each night. To not have this fortified protection leaves you quite vulnerable. And so this idea of a city without walls being comparable to someone who lacks self-control highlights the idea of vulnerability. Life without self-control implies that an individual is vulnerable to many of the forces and ideas and persuasions in a wider society. And now if we stop and think about this idea of self-control here that's used in Proverbs 25-28, the actual word self-control in the original language, it doesn't really have this idea of self. It's really about this idea of holding back, of having restraint, of being able to prevent something. So if we sort of substitute some of those words into the proverb, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks restraint, is a person who can't hold back, is a person who won't prevent something. And now when we go to the New Testament and hear the references to self-control there, the original language again doesn't have this sense of self-power, but rather this idea of dominion and mastery. You see, when the Bible talks about self-control, it's not about something that we use to attack others, but it's an important form of defense for our soul and our well-being. As we think about self-control, it's not something that is desirable for us to prosper and to flourish and to succeed over other people. Although for many who have self-control over finances in our capitalist society, they may well financially prosper. But rather, the significance of self-control is that it protects us against things that will harm us. The ability to demonstrate restraint, to prevent those things that are undesirable in our life, is actually the pathway towards fruitfulness. And so if we just think about one of the topics we looked at the other week, anger, and I'm thinking of it because it's something that I've been dwelling on, a broken city wall is about someone who loses control of their temper, who constantly says that their emotions got the better of them, who is easily overwhelmed and shows their vulnerability in a lack of restraint. You see, self-control is evidenced by restraint. It's about feeling anger but not being controlled by it. It's about having the ability to process the situation and to inquire whether this is a good anger that's justifiable or whether this is an anger that is real but not justifiable. Self-control is also about holding back. It's the ability to not retaliate off the cuff. It's not about being rash, but rather it's about being measured. It's seen in the ability to be slow to anger, giving ourselves the time and having the ability to process the situation and then respond appropriately. And now, sometimes in our wider society, we hear about self-control being referred to as a muscle. When we aren't just led by the feelings part of our brain, but activate the thinking part of it, and that we make good decisions. And certainly our brain is configured that way, that pathways that are used and repeated are easier to repeat in the future. Exercise, eating right, speaking well, when these are habits that we demonstrate, our body gets in sync with that. But these moments that we realize that we don't demonstrate self-control show us our vulnerability. And I think for all of us, there are particular aspects of life where we find self-control difficult. You see, some people can have great self-control over their eating, but are very frivolous with their spending. Others seem to have self-control over their tongue, but are overwhelmed with lustful thoughts. Others find it easier to control their anger, but are unable to control their speaking, and therefore are poor listeners. As we become aware of the particular situations where we don't demonstrate self-control, we are like a city with a broken wall. We are made aware of our vulnerability. And this is actually the first step of real change, because it reminds us that we haven't arrived. Remember, although we use the word self-control, and it's even there in Proverbs 25:28, it's not really about self-direction. It's not about self-will. Our vulnerabilities direct us to ask for help. And so the help that Christianity offers isn't some 3-step secret to self-control. It doesn't direct us to look inward, but it's an acknowledgement that we need protecting, that we are vulnerable in a whole range of ways, that we need a wall around us. And the wall that God offers is His Spirit. And now we read in the New Testament, in the book of Galatians, that self-control is described as one of the fruits of the Spirit, one of the evidences that God's Spirit dwells in His people. Chapter 5, verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And now we see in the New Testament the work of the Spirit, initially in Jesus Himself. And we see the way in which the fruits of the Spirit manifested self-control in Jesus' life. He demonstrated appropriate anger. He was able to restrain himself in particular moments. He seemed to be slow to anger when that was appropriate. He certainly wasn't consumed by anger, although he faced a number of situations where he was right to respond in anger. He was so not overwhelmed by anger that he was able to pursue peace and even pray for and move towards his enemies. And so Jesus is the one who we see the Spirit dwell in. Jesus is then the one who sends the Spirit out to his followers. And it's the fruit of the Spirit that is seen in the lives of those who trust Jesus. And so the characteristic of self-control is a gift from God. God gives his Spirit to those who trust in him. And the Spirit gives us strength to resist the various temptations that we face. It gives us confidence to start to work out self-control in various aspects of our life. It is God who empowers us to grow and navigate these thousands of crossroad moments that we have each week. These decisions that shape and direct our path. So, do we just sort of sit back and let this great gift of the Spirit do its thing? Well, no. If we move to another section of Proverbs for our second approach, I think chapter 4 in Proverbs gives us a helpful framework for how self-control works out. Proverbs chapter 4 verses 1 to 9. Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands and you will live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom and she will protect you. Love her and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Cherish her and she'll exalt you. Embrace her and she will honour you. She'll give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown. These first 9 verses in Proverbs 4 gives the exhortation to seek good things, to seek the things that God would desire. And again, we see the context of this exhortation is in a familial relationship, for a parent to speak to a child, for a child to listen and be directed by their parent. And again, it's not about finding a secret formula for every decision that we face, but it's about how we engage in the simple decisions that we all encounter. It's about taking hold of the instruction that is available. It's about not forgetting what God has directed as good, but rather keeping it. It's about moving towards Him rather than being distracted by other voices. Going on from verse 10, listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. I instruct you in the way of wisdom and lead you along straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hampered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction. Do not let it go. Guard it well, for it is your life. Do not set foot on the path of the wicked or walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn from it and go on your way. For they cannot rest until they do evil. They are robbed of sleep till they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. Again, this passage in Proverbs 4 captures the idea of crossroads moments. There are 2 paths. There's lightness and darkness, wisdom, wickedness, a good decision and harmful outcomes. And again, the exhortation is hold on to what's good. Don't let go of it. Guard it. And avoid that which can hurt you. Turn from that which is deceptive. Beware so that you don't stumble. And then from verse 20, I think there's a really helpful framework of the process that we interact as we embrace self-control in these particular moments. Verse 20, my son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body. We see here that self-control begins with a desire. It begins with the things that we value. It begins by seeking God's word, listening to it with the intention of acting according to what we hear, seeking to implement what we understand. And so these opening 3 verses here give us a picture of concentration, focus, a direction and a commitment towards God. It's like the kind of concentration that we approach someone who we really value. Whether it's some sporting coach, musical instructor, or a boss at work whom we just want to glean everything off. It's this picture of truly desiring to understand the direction that is being given. And then the transformation happens in a holistic way. Verse 23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. You see, real change, it begins by trusting God wholeheartedly in the moment. True self-control, lasting self-control, it begins with a transformation of our inner being. The heart here is sort of this picture of our holistic essence. We might normally refer to it as our mind, our chief thinking and decision-making faculty. But what we see here is a vulnerability at our very essence that invites God to shape our outlook on life, to truly guide our path. And then verse 24, keep your mouth free of perversity, keep corrupt talk far from your lips. There's this sense here that our words and conversations either reinforce or contradict our inner belief. When we're constantly cynical in our words, it perpetuates a cynical outlook on life. So too with grumbling or flippancy or speaking half-truths. When left free to reign, our tongue and our words can easily master and direct our outlook on life. They can either strengthen us for these crossroads moments or leave us more compromised. And moving on, verse 25, let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. There's a sense here that, again, like our tongues can reinforce or distort our inner convictions, so too can our eyes. Wandering eyes can perpetuate unfaithfulness in our heart. It can breed discontent with our situation. The lustful glare at a beautiful person that you walk by, the inability to stop looking at the real estate market, addiction to your social media feed. What gravitates our eyes can shape our outlook. And if our eyes are left unchecked, it can leave us unable to hold back, to have control over our desires. And verse 26, give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. You see, again, it's not just the things that we say or the things that we look at. It's the things that we do that reinforces our belief. Having habits that demonstrate self-control reinforces the things that we value. It builds protection for us in the face of future temptation. And so what we see here is that while self-control is a fruit of the Spirit, it's God's gift to protect us in our vulnerabilities. It's not something that's disembodied from our experience. It actually begins with the submission of our innermost being. See here that it's not some disembodied experience. Self-control begins with a submission of our heart, seeking God, concentrating and desiring to know His will, and then to speak in a way that helps clarify our understanding, to reinforce and to learn and to articulate what God's good desires are. It's seen in our catching of our eyes and looking and pursuing on what is good and right. And then it's reinforced by our actions, real decisions that we make, living out the world view that we hear God directing us. Now, for those of you like me in lockdown, that can sound a little bit too much of a workout for where I'm at. But the great news is that self-control isn't something that we work out all at once. It begins in a moment. And it continues momentarily as we have decisions. These crossroads moments to seek God's word, to understand his will, and then to walk in it. And when we make good decisions, when we demonstrate some level of self-control, we're encouraged. We see the gift God's given us being useful. And when we fail, we are reminded of our vulnerability. We seek God. We acknowledge our failings, the brokenness of our own devices, and we are invited again to trust him in the next moment. And it's a community project as we see the growth in self-control in one another, as we share our own struggles, whether it's to conceptually understand what it is that God values, whether it's catching out the way that we're speaking in perhaps a way that's unhelpful, whether it's sharing the things that we are feeling that we're easily distracted by with our eyes and our affections. It's encouraging one another in actions that lead to growth, strength, and life. So I want you now to have a think about perhaps one of the topics that we've looked at in the last few weeks. Anger, listening, truth and lies, friendship. What would it look like to grow in self-control in one of these areas? Now, next week we're going to be talking about, I think, a pretty relevant thing: food and drink, gluttony and drunkenness. And we'll be seeking to apply this idea of self-control in the moment for those particular areas in our life. Thanks for joining us. I pray that God would be working in your life and that you would know him. Thanks.